Is there a tank shortage in Marvel Rivals, or is there something else going on? Let's talk about it. YouTube, what's going on, man? It's Father Dark. And I'm here on a beautiful Wednesday morning with a topic that was presented to me by some people in my Discord the other day. But it's also been something that I've been dealing with myself that I kind of wanted to talk about. So I thought that, out of all the suggestions for the next video topic, that would probably be the best one to go with. And that also reminds me too, if you haven't joined the Discord, I'd recommend joining it. If you need to find a link to it, if you go to my main channel page and you look next to my logo, you'll see where it says more info. You click that and you'll see the link to the Discord. We have LFG in there. We do customs. We do scrims, just all types of stuff in there. If you're just looking for more people to play with, whether you're male or female, we don't have any type of toxicity in there. If we have any of that, we go ahead and show people the door immediately, so you don't have to worry about any of that nonsense. And if you just want to be able to ask me questions or maybe present me with topics that you find interesting for videos, kind of like this one, it's a perfect place to do it. And before we get into the video too, I do want to say thanks to U4GM and their sponsorship. They're a pro web provide Marvel Rivals bundles with cheap prices and fast delivery. They have more than 11K good comments. This website is really worth a try. Make sure to use my discount code DARK for an extra 5% off. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about this. The other day, I was going to my Discord. I was asking people, I said, hey, what do you think is a good idea for the next video for you all? I like to get some input every now and again. And a lot of people said a couple of different things, but for the most part, most people were talking about tanks and kind of got into what was the best tank and why there aren't a lot of people that have been playing tank. It seems that any of the people in the Discord server, along with myself, have been dealing with an issue where we have been having to solo tank lately. And one thing that I do want to ask you all to kind of put in the comments that I am interested about, one of the things that we really got into that we all went back and forth on is who we think is the overall best tank. And I'm not going to lie, I think that Emma is probably one of the best tanks in the game, but I do think that there is no like perfect one tank. I do think that you should have at least two tanks most of the time, especially if the enemy team has two tanks. I have won a lot of games as a solo tank, but usually that's if the other team is solo tanking or if I just have DPS that are going all out and kind of compensate for that lack of a tank. But like I said, Emma, she's probably one of my favorite tanks, I think, because she's basically an anti-tank. But I do think the perfect combination, if you're going to have two, is going to be Emma and Magneto. I think they both complement each other very well, but obviously they do completely different things. So that kind of makes sense to me. But I am curious to know who you all think is the best tank, just out of personal curiosity. Obviously, you can't say there's one tank that's better than the other one overall when they all kind of serve their own purpose and do things differently. Like my favorite, I'd say, is Thor, but probably the best currently for me in my own head is Emma Frost at the moment. But like I said, I'm curious to know what you all would think. So let me know in the comments who you think you're the best tank in the game is currently. Okay, so to get into it, like I said, the last few days I've taken a break. I'm pretty sure anybody who's not new to the channel, regular followers and stuff, have noticed it's been about 4 days since I uploaded a video. That's because I was actually just had some family stuff going on, and I also just wanted to grind out some rank. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed, because, I'm a flex player. That's what I do. I'm the kind of person where I don't have a favorite. I don't have a main. I mean, I'd say Spider-Man is probably the most fun person for me to play in the game. But I enjoy winning over anything. So I'm not going to sit here and, just one trick any particular character. I prefer for people to play whatever role it is that they're most comfortable with. And then I will flex to whatever, because I'm pretty comfortable with at least a handful of characters from each role. So I don't mind flexing. And what's really weird to me is that being a flex player, 9 times out of 10, it's usually a case where nobody wants to play support. That's how it's kind of like always been since I've started playing this game, is that support has seemed like it's the role that people have always kind of picked only if they had to. So I always went ahead and played, support. But this season, what I've been noticing is that there has been plenty of people to play support, and obviously there's never a shortage of people that want to play DPS. I won't say that there's a shortage of people that actually, or I will say that there's a shortage of people that are actually skilled enough to play DPS, but there's never a shortage of people that actually want to play DPS. The point I'm making is that, let's say out of 25 games that I've played over the last couple of days, I can count on one hand. There's maybe been 2 or 3 times that I had someone who actually just went ahead and picked tank without anybody having to say anything to them. 90% of my games have been where I'm just solo tanking. And even if the other team has 2 really good tanks and they're just demolishing us, teammates are like refusing to switch over to tank. And I really don't understand what's going on with that. So, I've created a few bulletin points that I'm going to kind of go off of and as to why I think that people aren't wanting to play tank as much. And I know that it's not just me, because we have a few people on our server that are way better than me and way higher ranks. And, they regularly stream in the server, and I'll jump in, I'll watch them for a while, show support, and, just to kind of see what's going on in different lobbies and stuff. And I'm noticing the same exact thing in their lobbies as well. I sat here and watched one of probably the best tank players I've ever seen in our lobby the other day, Sinatra. And there was a situation where they were actually not doing bad with having 2 tanks at one point. And then one of the people switched off of tank. They started getting demolished. And he even said, he was like, hey, maybe whoever was playing tank before, should switch back. And everybody just kind of ignored them and ended up losing the match. And I thought it was really interesting, because I've been dealing with the same exact thing. So like I said, I'm gonna talk from a few bulletin points here, as from some research that I've done as to why I think that people aren't wanting to play tank as much. But like I said, as always, let me know in the comments what you all think and why you think that people don't want to play tank as much. And have you been struggling with that? Is it just kind of a situation where it's just kind of like me and a few other people that I know that they're dealing with that? Are you getting plenty of tanks in your matches? And like I said, if you're not, why do you think that people don't really care about playing tank as much anymore? So one of the first things that I'll bring up that I've noticed that a lot of people leave in the comments, or they talk about in the Discord, or just whatever that I hear from the community, is one of the most obvious answers, I'd say, is that tanks feel very like they're not as fun to play as other roles. They don't feel as rewarding as other roles a lot of time. They kind of lack like that flashy feedback loop that you get from playing a DPS character, or kind of like how you can immediately kind of see the stats. I feel like, obviously, from being a support player and seeing like, oh, I did this many heals, like I got this many eliminations, oh, I did a great job. With tanks, it's kind of interesting, simply because your job is just really to be in the front line and just absorb a lot of damage. It's not saying that you don't get eliminations and that you can't get eliminations, but you have a very distinct role as a tank. And I feel like for a lot of people, being on the front line and having that pressure is just kind of a lot. So people tend to not necessarily want to pick that role, because if you're not capable or are able to make that space as a tank player, it's really interesting, because my wife just started playing Marvel Rivals, and I was trying to explain to her how every role works, because even with her initially, she just kind of immediately went for DPS characters. And I don't really know if that's because that's who she just related to, or she thought they were the most interesting. That part I don't really know. But I do know that, the first 3 characters she picked were all DPS characters. And I was explaining to her that, when you're first starting out, that I don't think that DPS is probably the best role to immediately go for. Not saying you can't, but I think just in a team-based game, it's probably better to start out maybe as a support player and understand that role, and then kind of go into the tank role, and then kind of go into the DPS role. And people may disagree with that, but that's just kind of from my experience, being someone who this is their first real hero shooter. I played a little bit of Overwatch, but not enough to feel like I made any real impact or anything like that. It was just something I did more casually with friends and family members and stuff. So this is like my first real dive into a hero shooter. And that's just kind of what I thought, would be like the appropriate steps for when you first start playing. And when I was explaining a tank's role, I was explaining to her, I was saying that, you have to be able to be on the front line and push. Like, let's say you're playing and you have the car, right? Or the cart, and you have to push it forward. A lot of times you don't even have to actually eliminate anybody. You just have to basically invade the other team's space to make them want to back up. But you do obviously want to try to mix in, getting eliminations and stuff as well. But I was just explaining to her that you don't there's been times where all I've done is, like, let's say I'm playing Thor. I just dive in, create a bunch of space, make everybody back up, and and then I go back to my team, get healed up, rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And there's numerous different tanks that you can do and different ways to play with them and stuff like that. But that's just something that I do think is interesting, and I do think that it kind of deters a lot of people from wanting to pick that role for that reason. But let's get into the next one. So, high responsibility and low recognition. When you're playing as a tank, you are the primary focus. Like we just said this, you're on the front line and you're absorbing all that damage. You're having to create that space. And being a tank, it takes a lot of game sense, because one of the things that I first learned when I first started playing a tank is that I think we all kind of have that initial response whenever you do play a tank, or if you ever have in the past, where you kind of just want to keep pushing forward, right? You're like, hey, I got this big health bar. I just want to keep pushing forward. And a lot of times you assume that your teammates are going to play the same exact way that you're playing. But there's a lot of factors that go into it. For example, let's say that your back line is being dived. you have to be able to have the awareness to know when to push up, but you also have to know when to peel and go back for your teammates to be able to help them out as well. And you can't get too far ahead because then you're not going to get healed. You're just going to get melted. And once the tanks are out of the way, it's kind of like once supports get out of the way, it's like people have gotten that what they view as a main pick, and they're like, hey, okay, they're down a tank, let's go ahead and push, or they're down a support, let's go ahead and push. And I'm not saying this or saying this to say that other roles aren't as significant, they don't play a part, because being a flex player, that's what you learn, is that every role is important and they all have strengths and weaknesses. They all have things that require you to pay attention. But I do feel like when I'm playing as a tank, there are just numerous things that I have to worry about and be aware of and stuff like that. And the only other role that I feel like that I have to be as mindful of is when I'm playing a support, simply because as a support player, life is just really hard. People are going to constantly focus you. They will go out of their way to try to get back there to eliminate you, simply because when you're out of the way, the team is not being healed anymore. And if they're not being healed and the enemy team is being healed, that just makes the enemy team's life a lot easier. So they're constantly going for you. But I do think that is one of the reasons why, as well, people are just not really as interested in. But I mean, let's be honest as well. Tanks are kind of the leader of the group. And being a leader in life is not something, a lot of people may think that they want to be a leader. A lot of people will act like they're leaders and talk about it and stuff. But it really is not something that is actually as appealing to people. Even if you think about it like at your job or something, having to be the boss may seem easy. A lot of people are like, oh, he's just the boss. He just gets to sit in his office all day long and do this or yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, though, heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? There's just a lot of responsibility that goes into being the person that is in the forefront and leading the group. And the next thing that I'll talk about too is the underwhelming tank roster and kit design. That's something that I hear a lot from people, is that they feel like there's just not enough tanks that are just different enough, or that, and I can disagree on that. I do think that there are some that are different from each other. And I do think that there are some tanks that have really cool kits and stuff. But at the same time, though, I do understand that when you look at the roster for DPS, even when it comes to support players, I do feel like there are a bunch of various different supports and stuff like that in regards to, or in comparison to, tanks. And with tanks, being able to play them and have fun playing them, for a lot of people, it just doesn't feel like there's a bunch of really fun picks for them. So the next thing I want to talk about too is meta pressures and pick rates. So the high damage, high heal gameplay makes tanks kind of vulnerable if not paired with strong support or damage to follow up. Matchup against popular high mobility threats like Wolverine can feel punishing for Vanguard players, further discouraging people from picking tanks. And I know they just nerfed Wolverine, but one of the things that I do think is interesting too is like something I'll notice from being a support player. When I have tanks that push up and they're out there working, I tend to push up with the tank, because obviously if the tank is just going forward and they're pushing into a team and the team is all close together and working together, they're all being healed and stuff, he's going to get deleted immediately. People think because you got that big health bar, you're just kind of invincible. Now you do have people like Venom who can, they can get in there, they can do a lot of stuff, press one button and they immediately have like half their health back. And then once they get into trouble, they can just kind of swing out, whereas most tanks don't really have that option. So when they do push up, I try to push up with them. But from playing tanks so much lately, I have noticed that there are a lot of times where I will keep pushing forward and my supports are just kind of like, nah, I think I'm good where I'm at. I'm just gonna sit here around this corner, and if they get deleted, whatever. And it does make life a little bit harder, because you do have to play based off of how your team is playing. And every situation is kind of different, because you're having to constantly adapt to how other people are playing the game. And that can be kind of infuriating, especially, like I said, it's one thing I feel like when you haven't played other roles, but for someone who, I have more time as a support player than any other role in the game. So for me, I'm used to adapting. If I have tanks that are kind of moving a little bit slower, whatever. If I have ones that are kind of like moving at like a medium rate, whatever. If I have ones that are really aggressive, then I'll let one support kind of stay back with the rest of the team if they need to, and then I push up and I make sure that I at least help that tank out as much as humanly possible, because I do understand kind of all the different roles and how they operate and the way that they might think based off of their kits and abilities and stuff like that. So, those are just some of the reasons why I think that we're not seeing as many tank players in the game. And like I said, this could be a thing because I do find it interesting is a lot of times like me and other people will be dealing with a particular issue where it's like, oh, I'm not really seeing this that much. Or I'm not seeing that. I remember I was talking about Jeff prior to his rework, how I was rarely ever seeing Jeff players. And in that video, there were so many people in the comments that were like, bro, I see Jeff's all the time on matches. And for me, now I'm seeing him all the time now since his rework. I don't know what it is now that has made people want to play him more because I feel like more people complain about the rework and stuff. But at the same time, it's like I had made a whole video talking about how Ultron and Jeff were just – it was like I couldn't seem to get a team where that I was getting anything different. But it is funny, though, because I do go up against a lot of teams where I'm not having these issues. I don't know if this is more of like a solo queue thing, which would kind of make sense. But you would think if you're solo queuing that you're not constantly going against fully stacked teams. But it does kind of seem like that is where we're going with this game. And it wouldn't be the first time that that's kind of been an issue, simply because pretty much any game that I've played with any kind of like competitive, multiplayer aspect or anything like that, which is what I tend to usually play most of the time. That is something that I notice happens over a period of time. Like when the game first starts out, of course, there's always going to be people who have friends that they regularly play video games with and stuff like that, or people that just don't ever want to like solo queue, so that they stack up whatever the case is. But I do notice that over time, as a game goes on and it gets further into its lifespan, that people start to kind of say, hey, you know what? I'm tired of the solo queue experience. Let me stack up. And then you do have people like myself that tend to lone wolf games a lot more. I mean, I do play with people from time to time, but for the most part, especially when it comes to rank, I like to solo queue because I don't ever want people to say, oh, well, you got carried or you're boosted or whatever the case is. But like I said, I have noticed, especially like this week when I've been playing ranked, is that it felt like every team I was going against had it figured out. They had 2 tanks. They had 2 good supports. They weren't, mixing and matching, doing random stuff. Do I have certain games where, people, they surrender or they seem like they have infighting or whatever the case is? Yeah. But for the most part, though, the majority of matches that I'm playing in, it seems like the enemy team just is doing everything they're supposed to be doing. Whereas on my team, people are just kind of like, God, we got 1 tank, we're losing, but whatever. I'll just keep swapping DPS instead of maybe trying a tank. Or it could just be a matchmaking thing too. Maybe that's an aspect of EOMM that I haven't really considered before, is that they will purposely kind of put you in with people that they know. They'll say, hey, you know what? This guy's been playing tank, so maybe he can carry this game where this is full of players that only play support and DPS. So that could be one aspect of it. There's just a lot of different variables and stuff that can go into it. But I do ultimately feel like most people don't just immediately jump on the tank kind of train. They either go, hey, I'd rather be safe in the back or seemingly safe in the back and, do support, or I'd rather do DPS because there's just so many different DPS characters and they're more fun a lot of times, or flashy, whatever the case is. But like I said, I am curious to know what you all think. Let me know in the comments if you've been having the same issue. Do you think it's kind of like maybe less people are playing because they kind of got shocked immediately when season 3 started because Wolverine was just so broken? I mean, he has been nerfed a little bit. I feel like I've been seeing less people pick Wolverine, and he's just been like less of a problem. But at the same time, Wolverine is still Wolverine. He's an anti-tank character. So that could be an aspect of it too. But just let me know in the comments what you all think. Is it just something that me and a few other people are dealing with? Is it something that you've been dealing with as well? I am curious to hear what you all think. But that's all I got for this video. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. And I'm Father Dark, and I'll catch you on the next one.